At the museum gala announcing the largest deal in Asteron's history, Trevor Sloan asked it loud enough for 3 tables to hear. How does it feel watching everyone who joined after you walk across that stage, while you're still the guy who has to leave before the meeting ends? Laughter spread. Audrey Reed stood 2 steps away and said nothing. Everett Lawson's phone lit up. His daughter, "I'm home. Don't forget to eat," he answered her. Then he opened an application he had not touched in 11 years. The screen behind the chief executive went black. Transaction locked. Founding shareholder approval withdrawn. Trevor was still smiling when the general counsel came down off the stage and said, "Mr. Lawson." 3 hours before the museum, Everett Lawson was standing at a junior engineer's desk with his hands in his pockets, reading someone else's code upside down. Owen Barrett had been fighting the same ingest failure since Monday. Records were arriving out of order, and every fix he tried made the queue slower. "You're validating on write," Everett said. "The validator's holding a lock the writer needs. It's not slow. It's arguing with itself." He took the keyboard, moved 7 lines, and gave it back. The queue cleared while Owen was still leaning forward to look. "That's it?" "That's it." Owen laughed the way people laugh when they've lost 4 days to something. "You should teach an internal course. Seriously, half the team doesn't know this stuff exists." Everett said he'd think about it. At 5:15, he closed his laptop the way he closed it at 5:15 every day and went to get his daughter. Nia was 15 and had opinions about everything, most of them delivered while doing something else. That evening, the something else was a balsa wood bridge spread across the kitchen table. And the opinions concerned a group partner named Dylan, who had not submitted his section the school's 3-dimensional printer that had been broken for 2 weeks, and the fact that her father was standing in front of the stove. "Can we just order pizza?" "I'm already making the thing." "You're making the thing badly. It's fine, I'll eat it." He set a plate down next to the bridge. She moved the bridge 2 inches and kept working, tongue between her teeth, gluing a diagonal into place with the concentration of a surgeon. "Dad," she said without looking up, "why do you let everyone at your job think you're like nobody, just the consultant guy?" He thought about how to answer that honestly and briefly and got about halfway. "Because knowing who you are matters more than making a room know it." Nia considered this for approximately 1 second. "Okay, but that's kind of a non-answer." She pressed the diagonal flat with her thumb. "Is the tie tonight or tomorrow?" "Tonight. Wear the gray one. The blue one makes you look like a substitute teacher." The museum was the kind of place Asteron rented when it wanted the evening to photograph well. Glass-high ceilings, a chamber quartet playing something forgettable near the coat check. 200 people in the atrium, and on every screen the same 3 words, "Building what's next." In 40 minutes, Graham Kessler would walk onto the stage and announce that Asteron was acquiring Noventus Labs for $2.4 billion, the largest transaction in the company's history. Everett had found a place near the wall when Trevor Sloan came over with 2 directors from corporate development in tow, the way a man arrives when he wants an audience already assembled. "Everett." Trevor's voice carried further than the distance between them required. "Still doing the little community projects? The coding thing for the schools?" 2 nights a week, Everett said, "and some infrastructure work for a clinic network." "That's great. That's really great." Trevor's eyes went down to Everett's phone, which had just lit against his jacket with a message from Nia. "See, this is what I always say about you. Family before career. Always." The sentence sounded like a compliment. Everyone standing there heard it land as a measurement. Trevor turned and gestured toward the stage where Audrey Reed was standing with 2 board members waiting to be named Vice President of Market Operations. 9 years ago, Audrey had been a junior analyst who couldn't read a data architecture diagram, and Everett had spent 4 months teaching her to, and then put her name forward for her first major client. "How does it feel," Trevor said, "watching the people you trained walk across that stage while you're still watching the clock so you can run home for pickup?" Laughter spread from the nearest table outward, the way it does when people are relieved that someone else is the target. A woman near the bar looked at Everett with something close to pity and then looked away. "Nothing to be ashamed of," Trevor added. "Not everybody's built to lead. Some guys are better suited to keeping things running in the back. He never said anything about the color of Everett's skin. He didn't have to. He was describing a room Everett had been assigned to for 20 years. Audrey was close enough to hear all of it. She didn't laugh, and she didn't tell Trevor to stop either. She came over after the group broke up, touched Everett's sleeve, and said quietly that Trevor had had a few, and it wasn't worth the night. Everett waited for her to say the simplest available sentence, Trevor. You have no idea who you're talking to, and she looked toward the stage instead because Graham was picking up his notes, and she went. Everett answered his daughter first. I ate. Lock up and don't stay up. Then he opened an application he had not needed to open in 11 years. The founder authentication gate loaded slowly the way old systems do when they've been left alone. One item waited inside it. The Noventus acquisition, $2.4 billion, sitting at final approval, requiring a signature from a founding shareholder. Nobody had called him. Nobody had emailed. The largest deal in the company's history had walked all the way to the last door without anyone knocking on his. He selected the transaction and placed a hold on it, with a request for independent review. He had already been told what the room thought of him. Now he wanted to know what the paperwork thought. The screen behind Graham Kessler went black in the middle of a sentence about global scale. What replaced it was smaller, uglier, and impossible to misread from anywhere in the atrium. 20 minutes later, Everett was in a private gallery on the second floor with 9 other people, most of whom had not spoken to him in 3 years. Margaret Ellison, Asteron's general counsel, had her phone in one hand and outside counsel on the other end of it, and she was explaining to the board slowly what the company had apparently forgotten. 14 years ago, Everett Lawson and Marcus Webb had founded a company called Lattis Forge. Everett built the architecture. Marcus handled investors and press, and did it well enough that for most of their history, the public face of the company was a man who had never written a line of the product. 11 years ago, with Asteron 4 months from insolvency, Asteron bought them. Everett had signed that deal on terms his own lawyers had called excessive. Founder ownership held in a trust, a veto over transactions above a stated threshold, a prohibition on pledging the core patents as collateral, the right to demand an independent audit at any time. He had insisted on all of it because he had watched what happened to the last company they sold, and he had never once used any of it. Denise Carver, the board's senior independent director, asked the only question that mattered, whether the trust was still live. Margaret said it was. The reason it had gone quiet was not written anywhere in the file. 9 years ago, Everett had been in Denver closing a distribution agreement when his phone rang at 4 in the morning. His wife Camille had collapsed in their kitchen at 10 the night before. A ruptured aneurysm, the doctors said afterward. Nothing, anyone could have caught, nothing, anyone could have stopped. She was 38. He landed 6 hours after she died. Nia was 6. At the reception after the funeral, she fell asleep on the living room floor in the middle of 40 people still wearing her shoes. And Everett stood over her for a long time doing an arithmetic he could not make come out any other way. She had lost one parent to something nobody chose. He was not going to let her lose the second one to a calendar. He resigned his executive role 11 days later. He kept the trust because his lawyers insisted, and then he spent 9 years never opening it. Marcus Webb sold out 8 years ago, one of the corporate development directors said. He gave an interview. He said the founders had all moved on. Mr. Webb sold his stake, Margaret said. Mr. Lawson did not. Everett watched the room reorganize itself around him in real time. People who had spent the evening at other conversations found reasons to be near this one. A vice president who had called him Ev for 6 years said Mr. Lawson twice in a single sentence and heard himself do it. Graham Kessler had the face of a man performing arithmetic he did not enjoy. He said warmly that this was obviously a misunderstanding, that of course Everett would be brought fully into the process, and that they could clear it up in the morning and get back to the announcement. Trevor had stopped smiling somewhere on the stairs. He came in late and tried the only door he had. Everett, come on. It was a joke. You know it was a joke. Everett looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. You asked how it feels? He said. That's the answer. But he did not stop there, and that surprised the room more than the hold had. He told Margaret Ellison he wanted the transaction frozen in full, an independent audit of Noventus Labs' financials, a review of every relationship between the two companies, and an accounting of who had authorized the use of the core patents as security against anything. Then he said the thing that made Denise Carver take out a pen. And I want to know why the founder approval requirement was skipped. Not who forgot, why. Graham said the legal team would look into it. I'd like it to be a team that doesn't report to you, Everett said. Audrey Reed's promotion was never announced. The stage had been struck by 10, and the invitations were the last document in the company to describe her as anything other than the head of market operations. Everett left the museum at 9:40. Behind him, the quartet had stopped playing, and the party had turned into 9 people in a second-floor gallery, discovering that the evening was going to be much longer than planned. In the car, he found a photograph waiting from Nia. The bridge, photographed from the side with the near truss, collapsed inward, and a diagonal snapped clean at the joint. It failed the weight test. I thought that part didn't matter, so I didn't reinforce it. He sat with the phone in his hand longer than the message required. The parts nobody looks at, he wrote, are usually the ones carrying the most weight. Then he drove home to a kitchen table covered in broken balsa wood and did not yet know how completely that sentence was going to apply to him. Bennett Rowe's office was on the 14th floor of a building that had been a department store, and he had kept the original windows, which meant the room was always 4 degrees colder than the hallway. He had represented Everett for 11 years and had spent most of that time sending invoices for retainer and nothing else. By the 3rd day, he had 2 junior associates, a forensic accountant named Priscilla Vance and a conference table covered in paper. Start with the valuation, Bennett said, because everything else hangs off it. Priscilla had run Noventus Labs 3 separate ways, and the 3 methods disagreed with each other by a normal margin and disagreed with Asteron's purchase price by a margin that was not normal at all. $2.4 billion, she said. I get somewhere between 800 and 900 million. Call it a third of what they're paying. Everett asked how the diligence team had produced a number 3 times hers. They didn't produce a wrong number. They produced a correct number from an incomplete balance sheet. That was the second thing. Noventus carried roughly $600 million in obligations that did not sit on the balance sheet as debt. They had been structured as contingent payments to earlier investors triggered by revenue milestones the company was already close to hitting. In a diligence binder, they appeared in a footnote on page 194 described as future consideration. They're debt, Priscilla said. They're debt wearing a costume, and they come due inside 18 months of closing. Everett did the arithmetic in his head and did not like where it went. Asteron would buy a company worth a third of the price, then spend the following 2 years using its own cash flow to pay obligations it had not been told about. He had watched enough budget cycles to know where that money came from. It came out of engineering first. Then Bennett slid a single page across the table, and Everett stopped doing arithmetic. It was a schedule from the acquisition financing. Asteron was borrowing against the transaction, which was ordinary, and the lenders had required security, which was also ordinary. What the lenders had been given was a security interest in a portfolio of intellectual property described by patent number rather than by name. Everett did not need to look them up. He had written the applications. He had argued with a patent attorney for 2 hours about the word concurrent. If Noventus misses its performance covenants, Bennett said, the lenders can move on that collateral. They can move on the platform. Everett set the page down. Everything Asteron runs sits on top of it. Payments routing the client data layer. All of it. Correct. That's explicitly prohibited in the merger agreement. Section 4. I put it there. Also correct. Everett looked at the patent numbers for a while. 11 years of not opening a door. And behind the door, someone had been quietly selling the furniture. They took the thing I built, he said, and pledged it against the debt of a company I've never heard of. Bennett capped his pen. I want to be careful here because you're going to be asked whether you're angry and it matters what you say. But a valuation gap this size isn't an analytical error. Nobody drifts 3 times off. Somebody designed this. Everett drove home with the folder in the passenger seat and found his daughter at war with a tube of adhesive. It's not sticking, Nia said. It says 30 seconds. It has been 4 minutes. Did you clamp it? With what, Dad? My hands are the clamp. He found 2 binder clips in a drawer and handed them over. She took them without acknowledging that they solved the problem, which was its own form of thanks. Can you drive me to the hardware place? I need aluminum, like a strip of it thin. He looked at the clock. It was 9 at night. Tomorrow. Tomorrow is late. The rebuild is due Friday. She pressed the joint together and held it. Also, my partner turned in his section 3 days after the deadline, and it's 4 sentences long. 4. I counted. Everett said that sounded frustrating. She agreed that it was extremely frustrating and continued to hold the joint. Then, without any change in tone at all, she said, "You've been looking at your phone way more than normal. There's a thing at work. Is it bad?" "I don't know yet." She accepted this, released the joint, and inspected it. "Okay, aluminum tomorrow, though. Before 6. They were at the hardware store the next evening at 5:40, and she picked the strip herself, holding 3 of them up to the light before she chose. The second discovery took 4 days and came out of public records, which Everett found more insulting than if it had been hidden. The fund holding a substantial position in Noventus Labs was called Halbrook Partners. Halbrook's registered filings led to a small holding company, and the holding company led to a family trust, and the family trust belonged to the parents of Trevor Sloan's wife. The connection sat 2 entities deep. It had never been disclosed to the Asteron board, and Trevor had sat in every diligence session and every pricing committee since the process began. Priscilla ran the numbers on what a close at $2.4 billion would return to Halbrook's position. The figure was somewhere north of $14 million. His bonus for the year is $800,000, Bennett said. This isn't a man protecting a strategy. Graham Kessler's arrangement took another 2 days and came out of the founder shareholder file, which Everett had a contractual right to inspect, and which nobody had expected him to inspect. 19 months earlier, the Compensation Committee had approved an extension of Graham's contract by 5 years contingent on the company achieving a stated asset threshold. The threshold was achievable in exactly one way that did not require another decade of organic growth. The last piece was the one Everett had asked for in the museum gallery, and Bennett brought it in without ceremony. 14 months before the gala, Graham had engaged an outside firm to prepare a legal opinion on the status of the Founder Trust. The opinion ran 40 pages and reached one conclusion. The founder approval right, it said, had been designed to protect the interests of operating founders and had lapsed with the departure of the last of them. It cited 2 facts in support. Marcus Webb had sold his entire stake 8 years earlier and had stated publicly that the founders had moved on, and Everett Lawson held no executive title, worked part-time, and had not participated in a governance matter in over a decade. "It's been 9 years, Everett said. "I know," Bennett tapped the page. They rounded that in their own favor in a document they commissioned on the one fact anybody could have checked. "Tells you what kind of 40 pages this is." Attached to the file was a message from Margaret Ellison sent 11 months later, 4 lines long, asking whether the Founder Trust had been cleared for the Noventus process. The reply was the opinion. After that, nothing. No follow-up, no second view, no note in any board package. "This isn't an oversight," Everett said. "No, somebody asked the question. They just bought the answer before anyone else could hear it." Everett called Marcus Webb that night from the driveway. They had not spoken in 6 years. Marcus sounded pleased for about 9 seconds. And then he heard what the call was about, and the warmth went out of his voice like a light being switched. "I don't know anything about a legal opinion," he said. "Nobody contacted me. I've been out since 2017. They quoted you. They quoted an interview. I said the founders moved on." "We had moved on, Everett." "I had." "I hadn't." There was a sound on the other end that might have been a chair. "Look, whatever's happening over there, it's not mine anymore. I cashed out clean. I've got a boat and a bad back and 2 kids in college." Marcus's voice tightened. "I'm not going to stand up in front of a board and relitigate a company I left 8 years ago." Everett let it go. He had learned a long time ago that a man explaining why he can't help is not asking to be persuaded. He thanked him and ended the call and sat in the driveway with the engine off. Leah Morgan came to Bennett's office on her own initiative on a Saturday with a canvas bag of printed reports because she did not trust the file share. She ran product operations, which put her in charge of whether things worked and gave her no authority over whether they were funded. Over 22 months, she had escalated the same problem 7 times. The core platform was degrading. Technical debt was compounding faster than the teams could service it. 4 product groups were staffed below the level required to maintain what they already shipped. Critical defects were being deferred into quarters that kept receding. Every escalation had been acknowledged. Not one had been actioned. In the same period, discretionary budget had moved steadily toward transactions that generated press releases and toward the compensation lines attached to them. "I stopped sending them after the 7th, she said. "Not because I gave up, because I finally understood they wanted the paper trail more than the fix. A logged concern is a concern somebody can point at later." What she had built instead was a recovery plan, and Everett read it twice. It proposed reinvesting in the core platform, killing 9 initiatives that had never produced revenue, cutting executive perquisite spending before touching headcount, granting equity to the engineering staff, evaluating employees on delivered outcomes rather than hours present in a building, and building the year around existing customers instead of buying growth from a company nobody had stress tested. Everett told her that if Graham lost the chair, he would put her name forward as acting chief executive. Leah did not thank him. She sat back and asked 4 questions in a row. Whether the board would see the underlying data or a summary of it. Whether she would control the budget or only recommend it. Whether Everett intended to involve himself in daily operations. And then the 4th one in exactly the same flat tone as the first 3. "Does the new oversight apply to you too, or only to the people who don't have a trust?" Bennett looked up from his notes. "That's a fair question," Everett said. "It's the only one I actually care about," Leah said. "I've worked for 2 people who wanted to save the company. They both meant it. They both ended up being the exception to their own rules." He told her he would answer it properly, and not tonight, and she said that was an acceptable answer, which from her was close to warmth. Graham Kessler had no facts to counterattack with, so he went after the frame instead. Inside Asteron, over the following 10 days, a description of Everett Lawson assembled itself out of nowhere in particular. He was unpredictable. He was emotional. He was bringing a personal grievance into a fiduciary process. He was disconnected from the culture of the company. Nobody mentioned his race, and every word chosen was available for a different use. Then the recording arrived. Denise Carver received an audio file from a corporate address with a note describing it as a matter of governance concern. In it, Everett's voice clearly said, "Trevor will lose everything, and so will the people standing next to him." The file was 51 seconds long. What had been removed was the following 2 minutes in which Bennett explained that the $14 million Holbrook return would be clawed back, that Graham's extension would fail with the threshold, and that both men were exposed to personal liability for breach of duty, and in which Everett said that none of that was his objective and asked whether there was a path that protected the workforce. Bennett listened to the 51 seconds twice and then sat very still. "Where were you when you took that call?" Everett thought back. "Outside the auditorium at Nia's school, between the presentation blocks." "So, a hallway? Public building? Someone was close enough to get clean audio of a phone call between you and your attorney." Bennett set the laptop down. "That's not gossip. That's surveillance, and it's a privileged conversation, which is a very different category of problem." The third move came through the courts, and it came fast. The original merger agreement contained a provision Everett had agreed to 11 years earlier as a concession, because his lawyers had told him it would never be invoked. It permitted a court to temporarily suspend the voting rights of a controlling holder who had been absent from governance for an extended period and whose present conduct posed an immediate threat to the stability of the enterprise. Asteron filed on a Tuesday. By Thursday afternoon, a judge had entered a temporary restraining order suspending Everett's voting rights for 72 hours. The board meeting to approve the Noventus acquisition was scheduled for Friday morning. "I want you to understand what just happened," Bennett said, "because it's the most useful thing we have." Everett waited. An emergency order at that speed doesn't come from being right. It comes from a filing that tells a judge a clean, urgent story with no time to check it. Judges grant those because the harm sounds immediate. He tapped the docket printout. which means somewhere in that filing is a sentence that isn't true. Nobody moves this fast on an honest record. On Thursday evening, Graham suspended Leah Morgan pending an investigation into the unauthorized disclosure of confidential materials. Her badge stopped working at 7:40. She was removed from the Friday meeting. Her recovery plan lost its author, and every engineer in the building watched a woman get walked out for talking to Everett Lawson. Nia heard about it from the internet, the way she heard about everything. A financial site ran a piece describing an absentee founder who had frozen a landmark transaction hours after a personal confrontation. Someone had used a photograph of Everett leaving the museum that night, caught mid-stride jaw set, and in that photograph, he looked exactly like the man the article described. Two of her classmates asked her whether it was true that her father was about to put a few thousand people out of work. He started to explain it to her at the kitchen table, and she cut him off, tired in the tone of a 15-year-old who has already had this conversation in her own head. "Dad, I know you. That's not the problem." She pulled her hair back. "The problem is, those people don't, and they still get to decide stuff." The last piece moved on Wednesday of that week, and it moved because Trevor Sloan overplayed his hand. He came to Audrey Reed's office to tell her that her instincts at the museum had been correct. Her silence, he said, showed she understood how the real world worked. And after close, there would be a structured discussion, and she would be very happy with where she landed. Audrey said the right things and went back to work. And that afternoon, she opened the post-close integration model because her name was on the distribution list and always had been. Market operations was not in the model. Her function was consolidated in month 1. Her accounts transferred to Trevor's group in month 2. She herself appeared in a retention appendix at 6 months, described as required through transition with an end date already entered. She sat with that for a long time. She had spent 9 years believing that standing close enough to power would eventually make her part of it, and she was reading a document prepared months earlier, in which the people she had stood beside had written down her expiration date. Then she did what she was actually good at, which was reading her own numbers. 3 years of client revenue renewal rates gross margin by account support cost per contract and expansion capacity. It was the only data set in the company that could demonstrate whether Leah Morgan's recovery plan was fantasy or arithmetic. Audrey ran it against the plan on a Thursday night in an empty building and found that Asteron did not need Noventus Labs at all. It needed to stop starving what it already owned. And then, because she was reconciling her own budget line at 2 in the morning, she found the third thing: $340,000 charged to market operations coded as market research paid to a firm called Halloran Strategic Group. She had never engaged them. Nobody on her team had. Halloran's public description of itself used the words investigative and reputation, and one invoice line item for a period covering the weeks after the museum was described as principal movement and contact mapping. It had been buried in her budget because hers was the only budget in the building with enough discretionary noise to hide it, and because nobody had expected her to look. By Friday morning, Everett had lost his vote. Leah had lost her badge. Denise Carver had heard 51 seconds of an edited recording. The recovery plan had been reduced to a rumor. 2,000 employees had been told that a man they had never met was threatening their jobs, and Graham Kessler had the numbers he needed. The night before, Nia had asked why he didn't just call Audrey and tell her to say what she knew. He had helped her. She owed him. "Because if I have to remind her what she owes me," Everett said, "then whatever she says in that room isn't the truth. It's a payment." The board convened on the 31st floor at 9. Everett was seated at the far end of the table, permitted to speak and prohibited from voting. Graham opened with global scale and post-close synergies and the risk of delay. The first 2 directors voted in favor. The door stayed shut. When a story makes a person angry or frightened very quickly, the cautious response is probably not to pick a side immediately. Sometimes, it is enough to notice who benefits from everyone running out of time before they hear the rest of it. 20 minutes before the first vote, the 2 men had stood alone in the corridor outside the 31st floor conference room, waiting for legal to finish setting up. Trevor Sloan made no threats. That was the part Everett would think about afterward. "You want to know what I actually can't get past," Trevor said. He was looking at the window, not at Everett. I've been here 12 years. I stayed until 10 o'clock 4 nights a week for the first 6 of them. I missed my sister's wedding for a call with Singapore because the client moved the window and nobody else on the team spoke the numbers. Nobody handed me anything. I took every single thing I have. Everett didn't interrupt. And then you're gone for a decade. A decade. You show up at a party, you open your phone one time, and the whole room turns around. Trevor finally looked at him. You tell me where the fairness is in that. There isn't any, Everett said. Trevor's jaw moved. But fairness isn't what you want, Everett went on. You want the price you paid to become a bill you get to hand to somebody else. That's a different thing, and it's the reason we're standing here. The doors opened and legal called them in. Graham Kessler presented for 19 minutes with the confidence of a man who had never in his career been asked to show his work. Global scale, post-close operating leverage, a growth trajectory that assumed every projection landed, the risk of signaling weakness to the market if the board hesitated. He used the word inevitable twice, and by the second time it had stopped sounding like a forecast and started sounding like a fact. Trevor followed him and left the museum out of it entirely. He described a shareholder who had been absent from operations for years, who did not understand the company as it existed today, who had appeared suddenly with a need to demonstrate relevance and who was frightening 2,000 employees to satisfy something personal. Then he referenced the recording without playing it. He said only that certain directors had received material regarding Mr. Lawson's stated intentions toward specific executives, and that he would leave it to their judgment. Everett understood the choice exactly. Nobody can cross-examine a file that never gets played. The first 2 directors voted in favor. Graham needed 4. When the chair turned to Everett and said he had the floor permitted to speak and not to vote, Everett stood, which nobody at that table did, and put a folder in front of each director. He said nothing about his character. He never mentioned Trevor's name. He walked them through the valuation 3 ways and the gap between $800 million and $2.4 billion. He walked them through $600 million in contingent obligations that were debt in a costume and came due inside 18 months of closing. He showed them the financing schedule and the patent numbers listed as collateral, and then he showed them Section 4 of the merger agreement, which prohibited exactly that in language he had written himself in a building that no longer existed. He gave them Halbrook Partners, 2 entities deep ending at a family trust that belonged to Trevor Sloan's wife's parents, and the $14 million a close at this price would return to it. He gave them Graham's 5-year extension approved 19 months earlier, contingent on an asset threshold achievable in exactly 1 way. And he gave them the legal opinion commissioned 14 months before the gala 40 pages, concluding that the founder approval right had lapsed with the departure of the last operating founder, with Margaret Ellison's 4-line question attached and the opinion filed as its answer, and nothing after it. Then he stopped and did the thing nobody in the room had prepared for. I want to be accurate about something before you vote, he said, because I've been described in this building for 3 weeks and none of the descriptions have included this part. He set his hands on the back of the chair. I have held oversight rights over this company for 11 years. Veto, audit, collateral protection. I negotiated every one of them, and I never used a single one until 3 weeks ago. Denise Carver looked up. Leah Morgan escalated the condition of the core platform 7 times in 22 months. I wasn't in those meetings. Engineering budget was moved into transactions 4 years running. I didn't ask where it went. Somebody commissioned an opinion to write me out of the governance of a company I helped build, and I didn't notice because I had spent 9 years making sure I wouldn't have to. He let that sit. I told myself I was protecting my daughter from the life I used to have. My wife died while I was in another city closing a deal. And after that, I decided the safest thing I could do for Nia was stay out of rooms like this one. That part was true. But I also told myself that holding the keys to a house was the same as caring what happened inside it, and that part was a lie I found comfortable. Every failure in these folders happened in a room I had the right to walk into. Whatever Graham and Trevor did, they did it in the space I left. Trevor started to say something about a convenient confession. Denise raised one hand without turning her head, and he stopped. Everett turned the folder in front of him to the page where Leah's plan listed what a post-close integration would cost in headcount. "There's one more thing I know that I didn't learn in this building," he said. "Every number cut on this page is somebody who goes home and explains to their kid that everything is about to change. I've had that conversation. It takes about 9 minutes and they remember it for years. If you vote yes after seeing the whole file, that's your right. Just look straight at what you're choosing." Then he took a single stapled document out of his jacket. "I've been told for 3 weeks that the real danger here is a shareholder with power and no accountability. I agree with that. It's the only thing in the campaign against me that's true." He slid it down the table. It was an executed undertaking, signed and notarized 2 days earlier. It placed every special right of the founder, trust, the veto, the audit, right, the collateral prohibition, all of it under the standing review of an independent oversight committee of the board, permanently including the veto he had used to freeze the transaction they were voting on. "That's binding?" Bennett Rowe said from the wall. "It was signed Wednesday. It doesn't depend on the outcome of this vote." Denise read it twice. She was 61 years old and had sat on 4 boards, and she had never once watched a man give away leverage before he knew whether he was going to need it. "I'd like the vote suspended until council has reviewed this," she said. "Graham said the timeline did not permit." "The timeline is a preference," Denise said. "This is a document." That was when the door opened. Audrey Reed came in with a laptop under one arm and a folder under the other, and Graham smiled because he had spent a week assuming she was his. She walked past him without a glance, connected the laptop, waited for the screen, and spoke to Denise. "Before the board goes any further, there are things I've known for some time that I didn't say. That delay is mine. I'm not going to present this as though I just found out." She put up her own numbers first because they were the only ones in the building that belonged to her. 3 years of client revenue by account, renewal rates, gross margin, support cost per contract, expansion capacity in the existing base. She laid them directly over the growth slides Graham had shown 40 minutes earlier, and the slides did not survive the contact. The expansion Asteron was buying for $2.4 billion was available inside its current customer list for a fraction of it, provided the platform underneath stopped degrading. "This dataset also answers a question the board hasn't been allowed to ask," she said. "Leah Morgan's recovery plan has been described to you as a wish list. I ran it against 3 years of actuals. It holds. Asteron does not need Noventus Labs. It needs to stop starving what it already owns." The second thing she put up was the post-close integration model. Market operations consolidated in month 1. Her accounts moved to Trevor's group in month 2. And in the retention appendix, her own name required through transition with an end date already entered. "I want to be honest about why I'm standing here," Audrey said. "I spent 9 years believing that if I stood close enough to the people with power, I would eventually be one of them. This document was written 5 months ago by the people I was standing next to. They had already decided when I would be finished." She addressed the museum in 4 sentences and softened none of them. "I heard Trevor tell Everett Lawson that being a father made him unfit to lead. I knew it was wrong when I heard it. Everett taught me to read a data architecture diagram when I was 26 and put my name forward for my first major account. I said nothing because I thought silence protected my future. It didn't protect me. It only made me more useful to people who never intended to keep me." She said that presenting this did not undo the choice she had made that night, and that she was not asking anyone in the room to treat it as though it did. Then she put up the third thing. An invoice. $340,000 charged to market operations, coded as market research paid to Halloran Strategic Group. She had not engaged them. No one on her team had. One line item, covering the weeks after the gala was described as principal movement and contact mapping. Denise Carver had spent the entire meeting listening to arguments. It was the invoice that moved her because the invoice was not an argument, it was a receipt. She had audit committee access, and she used it in front of everyone. Within 40 minutes, outside counsel had the engagement letter, and by the end of the day, Halloran had produced the unedited file. The full recording ran 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In it, Bennett explained the clawback exposure on the Halbrook position and the failure of Graham's threshold. and Everett asked whether there was a path that protected the workforce. In the background, faintly, there was a bell and the sound of a corridor filling with teenagers, and a girl's voice calling Dad from somewhere further down the hall. Denise listened to that part twice. Then she took her glasses off. They had followed a man to his daughter's school. They had recorded a privileged call with his attorney. They had cut 51 seconds out of it and sent it to her. And they had paid for the whole thing with company money hidden in another executive's budget. She did not raise her voice. She simply stopped treating Graham Kessler as the chief executive. The vote was suspended. An independent investigation was opened under outside counsel reporting to the independent directors. Graham and Trevor were removed from every part of the transaction. Leah Morgan's access was restored that afternoon, and the last item on Denise's list was a full review of the filings Asteron had submitted to obtain the emergency order. Trevor stood up and said Audrey had stolen privileged material. "Sit down, Mr. Sloan," Denise said, and for the first time in the entire story, the room did not interpret events the way Trevor Sloan told it to. The investigation took 11 weeks. It confirmed the valuation gap, the concealed obligations, Trevor's undisclosed financial interest, Graham's secret extension, the pledging of the core patents in violation of Section 4, and the fact that the recording sent to a director had been edited and paid for out of company funds. Two findings mattered more than the rest. The legal opinion had not been an oversight. It had been commissioned for a purpose. Graham had approved the engagement, received the opinion, and circulated it exactly once as the answer to the general counsel's question and to no one else. And the filing Asteron had submitted to the court stated that the company had never considered or evaluated Mr. Lawson's governance rights in connection with the transaction. It had a 40-page opinion on that precise question sitting in its own files. Bennett had said that nobody moves that fast on an honest record, and the emergency order was vacated on exactly those grounds. Graham Kessler resigned before the investigation closed and faced personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty. Trevor Sloan was terminated and his file was referred to financial regulators. The reputation he had spent 12 years building, the smartest man in the room, was dismantled by documents he had assumed no one would ever pull. The board offered Everett Lawson the chief executive's chair on a Tuesday afternoon. He turned it down and put a structure in front of them instead. Leah Morgan as acting chief executive for 12 months. Denise Carver chairing a standing independent oversight committee. Everett as non-executive chairman. Executive incentive compensation disclosed to the full board. Conflicts declared before any vote, not after. Equity granted to the engineering staff. Flexible policy for parents and caregivers written into terms rather than granted case by case. Performance evaluated on delivered outcomes rather than hours present in a building. And executive perquisite spending cut before a single role was touched. The last provision was already signed. Every oversight mechanism applied to the founder trust permanently without expiration. Leah read it through twice in the doorway of Bennett's office. "That's my fourth question," she said. "It was a fair question. You answered it 2 days before you knew whether you'd still have anything left to give away." She folded the page. "Fine, 12 months. Don't call me on weekends." Act 4. Audrey Reed resigned as head of market operations 3 weeks after the investigation closed. She stayed 6 months to transition her accounts and protect her team through the handover, which was longer than anyone required and shorter than she felt she owed. Then she joined an organization that helped businesses founded by women and by people of color get access to enterprise technology. She did not become a better person overnight. She told one interviewer that she still thought about the 4 seconds in the museum when she could have said one sentence and chose not to. But for the first time, the work matched the values she wanted to have instead of the reputation she wanted to be given. Leah Morgan spent her first week reading, her second week canceling things, and her third week telling 200 engineers what was actually going to happen. In 4 months, the core platform was funded for the first time in 3 years. 9 initiatives that had never produced revenue were shut down. Executive perquisite spending fell by 62%, and the memo announcing it was 1 paragraph long and named the line items. The engineering staff received their first equity grant in the company's history. And Asteron signed its first new enterprise client in 3 years, on the strength of a platform that had stopped failing quietly in the background. 6 months after the gala, the company came back to the same museum. Leah spoke from the floor instead of the stage riser, without a podium and without a slogan. She thanked the engineers who had been carrying a degraded system for 4 years and had been told each quarter that it was a priority. She thanked the client support staff by name. She thanked the people who left at a fixed hour every day because someone at home depended on it and finished their work anyway. Everett sat in the back row with Nia beside him. Denise Carver found him there afterward and asked why he wasn't up front. "If I stand up there," he said, "tomorrow everyone just remembers me." The meeting ended at 5:10. A young manager near the aisle checked her watch, gathered her bag, and hesitated in the way people hesitate when they are calculating what leaving early will cost them. Leah saw it. "You're done for the day," she said. "Go get your kid." The woman left without apologizing to anyone. Everett watched her go and thought that this was the part nobody would ever write about. Outside on the museum steps, Nia stopped and looked back through the glass at the room where 6 months earlier her father had been the joke of the evening. "Do you remember," she said, "when that guy asked you how it feels?" Everett remembered. Trevor wasn't in the room, but what held his attention was not the absence. It was a young engineer standing in a circle with 2 board members talking with his hands. A mother collecting her coat at 5:15 without checking who was watching. Leah standing inside a group of employees instead of in front of them. People who had been furniture in this building for years being called by name. "So how does it feel now?" Nia asked. "Not like winning?" "Then what?" "Like the room finally stopped needing somebody put down so everyone else could feel taller." Nia shifted the bridge under her arm. It had taken first place on Friday, and she had refused to let him carry it until they reached the stairs. "You used to say, knowing who you are matters more than making a room know it." I still believe that. He looked back through the glass once more. But when a lie is hurting other people, knowing the truth quietly isn't enough. She handed him the bridge at the top of the steps. The joint that had snapped clean 6 months earlier had been rebuilt and reinforced with a thin strip of aluminum. The one she had held up to the light at the hardware store on a Tuesday evening at 5:40. "Is that the strongest part now?" she asked. "No," Everett said. "The strongest part is that every joint shares the weight." They walked down toward the car together. This time he was not leaving a room because it had decided he did not belong in it. He was leaving because the work inside was finished and his daughter was walking beside him. A person's worth does not increase at the moment a room discovers they have power. Only the room's behavior changes, but this story does not hand Everett Lawson a clean verdict either. He stayed quiet for 9 years, and the space he left behind was exactly the room somebody else walked into.